She played her ukulele for a comatose patient, not knowing he was a billionaire watching all along. It was a slow Tuesday evening at Terra and Sage, a minimalist organic bistro tucked in a corner of downtown Portland. The scent of rosemary and charred lemon hung in the air. Light jazz trickled through overhead speakers, blending into the clink of glassware and the hum of hushed conversations. Avery Chen, 29, moved quietly behind the counter, drying glasses with rhythmic precision. Her dark brown apron, smudged slightly with wine stains, clung neatly over her pale blue blouse. She wasn't flashy, but she was efficient, calm, polite, and endlessly dependable. She'd worked at Terra and Sage for over 2 years, long enough to memorize the regulars' drink orders, long enough to understand the unspoken tension that sometimes drifted beneath the bistro's serene surface. That night, her father had called, not on the phone, but on FaceTime, something he rarely did unless he needed help. Avery saw the notification pop up on her Apple Watch and slipped into the staff hallway beside the dry goods pantry, barely visible from the dining area. She answered the call and smiled softly. Her father, who had been deaf since birth, signed anxiously, his brows furrowed. Avery's hands moved fluidly in response, signing back quickly, compassionately. He'd misplaced a prescription. Again. She reassured him she'd call the pharmacy after her shift, told him to rest, and that she'd handle it. The whole exchange lasted under a minute. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't even spoken out loud. But from the corner table near the window, someone had been watching. The holes. It was Elliot Van Doren, investor, billionaire, regular. He sat alone, nursing a glass of Bordeaux, with the same bored detachment he always wore like an accessory. Avery didn't notice the flicker in his expression when he saw her hands moving in sign language. She didn't catch the narrowed eyes, the tightened jaw, the silent judgment. Not yet. She returned to the floor, calm as always. But something had already shifted, something she wouldn't see until the next morning, when her name was no longer on the schedule. Avery didn't give it much thought as she returned to the floor. She checked on table 3, refilled a glass of sparkling water, adjusted the candlelight at a corner table. Just another Tuesday, just another shift. If anything, the brief conversation with her father had left her a bit more grounded. Being needed always gave her a sense of purpose. What she didn't see was Elliot Van Doren still watching her from across the room. Nah. He swirled his wine absent-mindedly, not tasting it. His phone lay untouched beside his plate. He had a way of commanding space without speaking, the kind of man whose presence could shift a room's temperature by a few degrees. He was used to control, routine, predictability. So when he saw Avery tucked in the corner, moving her hands in a language he didn't recognize, his reaction wasn't confusion, it was distrust. He didn't ask what she was saying, didn't wonder who she was speaking to. Instead, a line formed between his brows as he leaned forward slightly and whispered something to the assistant manager who had just come to check on him. The assistant nodded, a little too eagerly, and hurried off. Avery caught none of this. She floated between tables like she always did, present, helpful, invisible in the way that excellent service often is. She didn't see the way Elliot narrowed his eyes at her when she returned to the bar. She didn't hear the assistant manager making a quiet note in the logbook. She certainly didn't know that Elliot had already sent a message to the restaurant's owner before dessert even hit his table. To him, that minute-long moment in the staff hallway had looked like a breach of professionalism, a secret being whispered right under his nose. Maybe it was the movement. Maybe it was the language he didn't understand. Maybe it was just that Avery didn't fit the image of the kind of staff he liked to see. Silent, English-speaking, deferential. Whatever it was, that one quiet call had sealed her fate. When Avery clocked out that night, she felt nothing unusual. She walked home under the misty Portland sky, texted her dad to let him know she'd handled the prescription, and fell asleep with a book open on her chest. She had no idea that her shift tomorrow had already been canceled. The next morning, Avery arrived early, as usual. She pushed open the back door of Terra and Sage, the familiar scent of citrus cleaner and baked sourdough greeting her like a second home. She hung up her coat in the staff area, tied her apron, and walked over to the printed schedule on the corkboard. Her name wasn't there. She blinked, checked again, then glanced at the backup clipboard by the manager's office. Still nothing. No shifts listed for the rest of the week. Not even the Friday double she'd picked up from another server. At first, She thought it was a clerical error. She'd never missed a shift, never shown up late, never raised her voice. She was the one who stayed after close to scrub the espresso machine and relabel the tea jars. She knocked gently on the manager's door. "Hey, Carl?" she said, peeking in. "I think the schedule's missing my name." Carl looked up from his computer, startled. He was a man who avoided confrontation the way cats avoid water. His fingers froze above the keyboard. "Right, actually, could you come in and close the door for a sec?" Avery stepped in, confused. Carl gestured to the chair opposite him. She sat down slowly. "I wanted to talk to you face to face," he started, already looking down. "About yesterday," her posture straightened. "Yesterday?" There was some concern. "A guest reached out directly to the owner. Said something about a personal call you took during service." Avery frowned. "It was less than a minute. I was off the floor, behind the pantry wall." Carl nodded nervously. "I'm not saying it was wrong, I'm just telling you how it came across." He felt uncomfortable, said it seemed secretive. "Because I was using sign language?" she asked plainly. Carl hesitated, then added, "I think the exact words were, it gave off an unprofessional vibe. And the owner said that kind of perception can damage the brand." Avery stared at him, stunned. "So, I'm being let go because a guest didn't understand what I was saying?" Carl sighed. "It's not about what you did, Avery. It's how it looked." There it was. The line. Not what you did, how it looked. She sat still for a long moment, feeling the space between words grow heavier than air. She had no script for this kind of betrayal. "You know I've never broken a rule here," she said. "I know. I told them that," Carl said, lowering his voice. "But Elliot Van Doren, he's not just any guest. He's an investor. You know how it works." She stood up, calmly. "No. But I'm starting to." Carl handed her a sealed envelope. Final check. A short letter printed on thick ivory paper. "Best of luck," he said weakly, not meeting her eyes. Avery walked out of the office without another word. Her apron came off slowly, like peeling away a layer of trust. She folded it carefully and placed it on the counter. Outside, the morning fog clung to the pavement like something unfinished. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just walked. Espalme. But deep down, something was beginning to shift. Something larger than anger. Something with a voice. Avery walked for nearly an hour. The streets of Portland were still waking up. Cafes setting out chalkboard menus. Buses hissing at red lights. The distant hum of early commuters weaving through drizzle. She kept her head down, the letter still unopened in her coat pocket. The words, "It's how it looked," echoing like a dull drumbeat in her chest. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. "Sechumi. Sechumi. Noaskin waving. Noaskin waving. All good? Just checking in. Noaskin waving." She stared at it. He had no idea. No idea that the quiet moment they'd shared, her trying to calm his panic over missing medication, had cost her a job, a steady income, her peace. She didn't know how to explain that signing to him had made someone uncomfortable, Nutho. It wasn't just the firing that stung. It was the implication. That her language, her way of loving and caring, her connection to her own family, was a liability. That it was suspicious. That it was unprofessional. Avery had always tried to make herself easy to work with. Quiet. Efficient. Neutral. She wore neutral colors, spoke in even tones, kept her hair tied back, not because she lacked identity, but because she'd learned how unsettling identity could be to people who felt entitled to define professionalism on their terms. The silence that followed her termination wasn't new. She'd felt that silence before, in classrooms where teachers mispronounced her name and didn't correct it. In job interviews where hiring managers blinked in surprise when she clarified, "Actually, I speak 3 languages." In bars where men complimented her English like it was a trick. And now, in this restaurant, where a minute of silent communication with her father had become a reason to erase her. That evening, she sat in her tiny apartment, the letter unfolded on the kitchen table. Her father FaceTimed again. She hesitated, but answered. His face lit up. His eyes smiled. His fingers moved with energy. "How was your shift?" Avery paused, then signed back, steady and clear. "I lost my job." Her father's hands stopped moving. His expression changed. "Why?" She exhaled, then told him everything, every painful detail, in the only language they had ever shared without judgment. When she was done, he looked into the screen, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and something deeper, something protective. Then he signed. "You didn't do anything wrong." Avery nodded. But something inside her still twisted. She had stayed quiet to be safe. She had followed every rule. And still, it hadn't been enough. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake wondering how many others had been made to feel unprofessional for simply being themselves. And by morning, she knew one thing. She hadn't just been fired. She'd been misjudged. Muted. And now, she was done staying silent. Avery wasn't planning to tell anyone. Not at first. The injustice of it all weighed on her, sure, but she wasn't trying to go viral. She didn't want pity or performative outrage. She just wanted to breathe, to heal, to figure out what came next. Broad. But someone else wasn't ready to let it slide. That someone was Jordan, a line cook at Terra and Sage and one of the only people who had ever truly seen Avery at work. He was blunt, sarcastic, and fiercely loyal. They'd bonded over late-night cleanups and shared playlists during prep. When he heard what happened, he was furious. "I don't get it," he said, pacing his cramped apartment later that night during a video call. "You answered your dad's call, you signed for 30 seconds, and now suddenly you're the enemy?" Avery shrugged. Elliot didn't like it. Carl didn't question it. That's the whole story. "No," Jordan snapped. "That's their version of the story." The next afternoon, Jordan posted a short message to a local hospitality Facebook group. "A friend of mine just got fired from a high-end Portland restaurant. Not for being late, not for being rude, not for breaking protocol. She answered a quick FaceTime from her father, who's deaf, and used sign language. A customer didn't like it. Now she's gone. Think about that." He didn't mention Avery by name, didn't tag the restaurant, just left the story there, floating in the ether like a lit match. Within hours, the post had been screenshotted, reposted on Reddit and Twitter. Commenters guessed which restaurant it was. Some recognized Elliot Van Doren's signature wine order. Others had their own stories. Similar, painful, too familiar. By nightfall, someone had posted a grainy photo of Terra and Sage's menu with the caption, "They serve Korean bibimbap and Thai lemongrass cocktails, but fired a girl for using sign language with her dad?" A thread followed. Hundreds of comments, then thousands. "My brother's deaf, this is disgusting. So tired of inclusion being a tagline and not a practice. I got written up once for speaking Spanish to a coworker in the break room. I've been that girl, different city, same silence." By midnight, Terra and Sage's Yelp page was flooded. 1-star reviews, angry essays, calls to boycott. Someone even dug up an old clip of Elliot speaking at a tech conference and captioned it, "This is the guy who gets women fired for being bilingual in sign language." Avery's phone lit up nonstop. Messages poured in, from strangers, from old classmates, even from professors she hadn't heard from in years. Some offered solidarity. Others asked for interviews. One simply said, "Thank you. I needed to read that." Still, Avery hadn't said a word. Not yet. She wasn't sure what to say, or how to say it. But she could feel something building inside her. A quiet, burning clarity. The world already knew what happened. Now it was time they heard it from her. By the next morning, Avery couldn't ignore it anymore. She hadn't left her apartment in 2 days. The outside world suddenly felt too loud. Ironically, louder than it had ever been when she was actually working. Her phone was a symphony of pings and vibrations. Text messages, Twitter mentions, missed calls from unknown numbers. Jordan called again. "You seeing this?" "I'm seeing it," she said quietly, eyes scanning the latest Twitter thread with her name now hashtagged alongside words like hashtag ableism, hashtag sign language is not ASIN, and hashtaggle Thurspeak. "You're trending," he said. "You haven't even said anything yet, and the internet already picked a side." Avery looked out the window, the city blurring behind raindrops on glass. "I didn't ask for any of this," she murmured. "Jordan didn't miss a beat." "No, but you didn't deserve it either. And maybe it's not about what you asked for. Maybe it's about what other people need to hear." She hung up, placed her phone down, and sat in silence. For years, she had shaped herself into something easy. Soft edges, no sharp corners, no waves. She kept her language quiet. Her culture folded small. Her truth tucked into private corners of her life. And even when she was pushed out, discarded for a moment that meant everything to her and nothing to someone else, she still hesitated to speak. Because she knew the risk of being too much. Frou. Too visible. Too loud. Too foreign. First. But that hesitation? It wasn't protection. First. It was surrender. And Avery Chen wasn't surrendering anymore. She opened her laptop, took a breath, and began to type. Not a rant. Not a takedown. Just her truth. Simple and steady. "My name is Avery. I was fired from a restaurant in Portland last week after a customer complained that I was using sign language to speak with my deaf father during a brief video call. I wasn't disruptive. I wasn't disrespectful. I was just communicating with someone I love, in the language he understands best. That's all it took. If you've ever been made to feel small because of who you are, how you speak, or where you come from, please know you're not alone. Your voice matters. Your language matters. And you shouldn't have to hide either one just to keep a job." She hit post. 10 minutes later, the retweets began. An hour later, it hit 10,000 likes. By the end of the day, it had become a rallying cry. Avery sat in stunned silence as news anchors started referencing her words. Advocacy groups reposted her tweet. Students shared it in class discussions. People sent photos of themselves signing "Thank you" with captions that simply read, "We see you." But Avery didn't feel powerful. She felt honest. And that, for the first time in days, felt enough. 3 days after Avery's post went viral, the email arrived. Subject line: Request for resolution, Tara and Sage. Sender: M. Halberd, Legal Counsel. The message was short, formal, clinical. "Ms. Chen, we are aware of the recent public attention surrounding your separation from Tara and Sage. Our team would like to arrange a private conversation to ensure clarity and mutual understanding. Please let us know if you are available for a brief meeting. Sincerely, Martin Halberd, Legal Affairs, Tara and Sage Group." Avery stared at the screen, the corners of her mouth tightening. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just the weight of a corporation hoping to wrap a scandal in silence and walk away with clean hands. Still, she agreed. Not because she wanted to resolve anything, but because she was done hiding. They met in a small office suite overlooking the Willamette River. Avery arrived alone. Jeans, sneakers, no makeup. Her hair tied back, face bare. She wanted them to see her exactly as she was. Unpolished, unafraid. Across from her sat Halberd in a tailored navy suit, flanked by someone she hadn't expected. Claire, the regional manager. Claire had never spoken to Avery directly before. She looked tired, corporate tired. Halberd cleared his throat. "First, we'd like to acknowledge that this situation has escalated far beyond initial expectations." Avery said nothing. "We believe," he continued, "that it is in everyone's best interest to move toward closure. To that end, we are prepared to offer a 3-month severance package, along with a letter of recommendation." Claire nodded stiffly. "In exchange," Halberd added, "we ask that you agree not to speak further about your experience publicly, a standard non-disclosure." Avery leaned forward slightly. "You want me to take money and stay quiet about being fired for using sign language with my father?" Halberd's jaw tensed. "It's not about silencing. It's about avoiding further misrepresentation." Her voice was calm. "You represented yourselves just fine. I just told the truth." Claire looked away. Avery continued. "Let me be clear. I'm not interested in your check if it comes with a muzzle. I want a public apology. No NDA. No corporate dodge." Halberd frowned. "That's not our preferred. It's mine," Avery said. "And it's non-negotiable." Silence fell across the table. Finally, Claire spoke, voice soft. "You didn't do anything wrong. I should have stepped in. I was afraid." Avery met her eyes. "So was I. But I'm still here." By that afternoon, Tara and Sage issued a statement across all their platforms. We acknowledge that the termination of Avery Chen was not aligned with our values of inclusion and respect. Communicating with one's family in their primary language, spoken, signed, or otherwise, should never be cause for dismissal. We apologize to Avery, the deaf and signing communities, and all who were hurt by our decision. We are reviewing our internal practices to ensure this never happens again. The response was immediate. Some applauded. Others called it damage control. Dat Cordy. Avery didn't care. Dat Cordy, the apology wasn't for them. It was for every child who signed across the dinner table and was told to use normal words. For every employee who hid their accent behind forced smiles. For every person made to feel unprofessional just for being authentically themselves. She left the meeting without a check, without a handshake, but with her voice intact. And that, to her, was more valuable than anything they could offer. The moment Tara and Sage published their public apology, the digital wave swelled again. But this time, something shifted. Avery no longer felt like the quiet girl at the center of a storm. She felt surrounded, not by chaos, but by community. People from all corners of the world began sharing their stories, some in spoken language, some typed, others signed and subtitled, in small, heartfelt videos. A teenage boy in Kansas posted a clip of himself signing to his little sister at school. A barista in Toronto shared how she'd been reprimanded for confusing customers by speaking Tagalog during her break. A French-Algerian nurse wrote that she had stopped speaking Arabic at work after being told it made the hospital staff nervous. And in every message, in every story, was the same quiet plea, "Thank you. I thought I was the only one." Avery watched the movement grow, not because she asked it to, but because the world had been waiting for someone to open the door first. She didn't start a protest. She didn't stage a walkout. All she had done was speak, honestly, calmly, unapologetically. And that, it turned out, was enough to light the match. A local college invited her to speak at their diversity forum. A nonprofit for the deaf community asked her to join a panel. A small publisher emailed, wondering if she'd ever thought about writing a book. But even through the growing noise, Avery stayed grounded. She knew fame could fade just as fast as it appeared. She wasn't interested in being a symbol, she just wanted to live with her voice fully intact. And that voice? It had found new purpose. She started a blog. Not flashy, not political, just personal. At first, it was recipes passed down from her dad's kitchen. Ginger garlic tofu, miso-laced noodle soup, scallion-studded dumplings. But in between the lines of ingredients, she added reflections on identity, on language, on what it means to be misunderstood in a world that fears what it doesn't recognize. The blog quietly exploded. People didn't just bookmark the recipes, they shared the stories. One woman from Oakland messaged, "I haven't spoken Spanish at work in 10 years. Your post made me cry. I didn't know how heavy that silence had gotten until I remembered my own voice." A teenage boy from Sweden wrote, "I used to hide my hearing aids under my hair. Not anymore, thank you." A teacher in New York played Avery's original Twitter video in her class and let the students write reflections on language, power, and courage. Avery had never planned to be anyone's inspiration, but sometimes the simple act of refusing to disappear is enough to show others they don't have to vanish either. It was a quiet Sunday when Avery finally answered a FaceTime call from her dad, on speaker, in public, with no hesitation. She stood in line at a small corner market, a bundle of green onions and sesame oil in her basket. The woman behind her glanced over as Avery's hands began to move, fluid and expressive. The cashier paused, watching her smile and sign with such ease. But Avery didn't shrink. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't lower her language to make someone else more comfortable. Mafiltiri 5. She just existed, fully, without fear. Norse, that was the real freedom. Norse octas. It didn't come from revenge or a payout. It came from reclaiming space she'd been taught to compress. It came from refusing to hide something beautiful just because others chose not to understand it. Gal. Avery never returned to the restaurant world. Not because she was bitter, but because she was done shrinking herself to fit someone else's definition of professional. She enrolled in a part-time culinary program, one that didn't ask her to check parts of herself at the door. There were no polished investors, no uncomfortable glances when she signed to her dad. Just chefs, ingredients, and a room full of people who cared more about flavor than optics. She still called her dad every other night. They signed about everything: bad TV shows, missing socks, dumpling folding techniques. And every time she lifted her hands, there was no guilt, no shame, only the language of love and presence. In her blog, she once wrote, "People talk about finding your voice like it's something buried, but I never lost mine. I just learned how to mute it so others could speak louder. Now I let it ring. Not to fight, just to exist. And that, finally, is enough." And it was. Avery walked through her city a little taller now. She waved to strangers. She signed to her father in the middle of grocery aisles. She smiled at baristas when they paused, curious about her gestures. And if anyone ever looked uncomfortable, well, that was their burden, not hers. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. The online buzz quieted. But for Avery Chen, something far more important remained. Her sense of self was no longer something she protected in the shadows. It was something she lived in, fully. And she wasn't alone. Her story had rippled across continents, across oceans, across language barriers. She heard from a young girl in Seoul who had been punished at school for speaking Korean to her grandmother during lunch. From a Nigerian nurse in London who'd been written up for using Yoruba in the break room. From a Palestinian teenager in New Jersey who hid her Arabic poems in a drawer because her teacher once called them unreadable. They all carried the same quiet ache. I was made to feel small for sounding like home, and through Avery, they found permission to unfold. One night, Avery wrote a final blog post, one she had thought about for weeks but hadn't dared to share. She called it, "You don't owe your silence to anyone. They told me I didn't look like I spoke sign language. They told me it made someone uncomfortable. They told me I wasn't being professional. But what they really meant was, be less, be quieter, be more like us. But here's the truth. I don't owe my silence to anyone. Not to keep a job, not to keep the peace, not to fit someone else's idea of who I'm allowed to be. If you've ever been told to tone it down, to speak normally, to stop being confusing, remember this. You're never the problem. Your words, your gestures, your voice in any form are beautiful and needed. So speak. Speak in sign. Speak in Tagalog. Speak in ASL, Vietnamese, Arabic, Spanish, French. Speak in the language your grandmother taught you with her hands, her stories, or her kitchen. Speak loudly. Speak honestly. Speak so the next person knows they're not alone. And she hit publish because Avery didn't fight back to be a hero. She spoke out to be whole. And in doing so, she lit a path for others to follow, not with fire, but with language, love, and a reminder that truth doesn't need volume to echo. It just needs the courage to be heard. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.